Hey there, and welcome back to ClearPath Conversations. I'm Mark Bernardin. In the last episode, we closed out a series that I'm genuinely proud of. We talked about what separates good CSMs from great ones. Not the tools, not the dashboards, not the certifications, but the habits and mindset that drive real outcomes. If you missed it, go back and listen to episode 27 because it sets up what we're about to dig into over the next few episodes here. Because here's the thing, I talked a lot in that episode about ownership and strategic thinking, about seeing risk before it shows up in a report, on a dashboard, about understanding the difference between being busy and actually moving something forward. Today we're going to talk about a framework I built that operationalizes exactly that. It's called the Program Resiliency Plan, or the PRP. And before I explain what it is, I want to start with what it's not, because that distinction matters more than most people realize. Let me ask you something. How confident are you right now in your ability to tell which of your accounts are actually healthy? Not active, not engaged, not recently logged in, actually healthy. Now, if you're like most CSMs that I've worked with and mentored, you answered that question by thinking about your health score. Maybe you thought about adoption metrics, open support tickets, or maybe how the last call with them went. Perhaps you thought about whether renewals coming up soon and whether there's been any friction in that conversation. Now, all of that's reasonable, and all of that is incomplete. Here's the problem with how customer success has been trained to think about account health. We measure activity, we track what's happening right now, and we assume that if the activity looks good, the account's fine. That assumption is where accounts go to die quietly. I've seen accounts with strong adoption metrics churn at renewal. I've seen accounts with no open escalations go dark 6 weeks before renewal. I've seen accounts where every QBR for 12 months felt warm and productive. And then the champion left, and suddenly there was nobody in that building who could explain why they were paying for us. In every one of those situations, the health score looked fine right up until the point it didn't. And by the time the risk became visible, it was too late to correct the structural problems underneath it. That's the gap. Most CS teams measure performance. The PRP measures survivability, and those are not the same thing. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out. I was managing an enterprise account, a large financial services firm. Adoption was strong. The project lead was very deeply engaged. She attended every meeting, provided detailed feedback, and had championed the deployment internally. If you looked at the activity metrics, this account was a star, the greenest of green. But I'd been watching something that didn't show up anywhere in our system. She was the only person in that organization who could articulate what we did and why it mattered. Her manager had never attended a single executive meeting. There was no documented value narrative from the customer side. And she was posting frequently on LinkedIn about new opportunities. I initiated what would later become the foundation of the PRP. I started asking questions designed not to measure activity, but to measure structural integrity. What would happen to this account if she left tomorrow? Could anyone else in the organization explain the value of this program without her? If their budget priorities shifted next quarter, would this initiative survive the conversation? The answers told me that the account was fragile. Not red, not failing, not at immediate risk by any traditional measure, but fragile. It was a structure that looked solid from the outside, but had almost no internal support. Now, she left about 2 months later. And because I had already started rebuilding the relationship structure, meeting with her manager, documenting the value narrative in language that came from the customer's team, expanding engagement to two additional stakeholders, the account didn't collapse. We held the renewal, and 6 months later, we ended up expanding. That's not a recovery story. That's a prevention story. And the PRP is built around prevention. So, what exactly is the PRP? The Program Resiliency Plan is a structural assessment framework. It's designed to answer one question: would this account remain stable if conditions changed tomorrow? Not, is this account active? Not, did the customer attend the last QBR? Not, is the health score green? Those questions tell you what is happening. The PRP asks whether the account will hold under pressure. Now, the PRP is not a success plan. It's not a risk register. It's not a list of everything that has gone wrong or everything you need to fix. Those are all legitimate tools, but they all describe the current state. The PRP evaluates structural integrity, the difference between an account that looks stable and one that actually is. The way I think about it is this: imagine two buildings. Both are standing, both have tenants in them, both passed their last inspection, but one was built with solid materials on a reinforced foundation. The other was built quickly on soft ground with a few critical supports missing. Now, they look identical on the surface. The difference only becomes visible when a storm comes through. Most of the accounts in your portfolio look fine right now. The PRP tells you which ones will hold when the storm comes. Before the PRP evaluates anything, it requires one gating condition to be confirmed. And I want to spend a moment on this because it's more important than it might sound. The gating condition is priority alignment. Before you assess resiliency, you need to verify that the customer is still actively prioritizing the problem that your solution addresses. Not just using the product, not just logging in. The customer must be able to articulate that their initiative is tied to a current, funded, or actively discussed business priority. And they need to be able to say that without relying on you to explain it to them. If the customer can't do that, the the issue isn't resiliency. The issue is relevance. And when the issue is relevance, the PRP stops. The account enters requalification. Expansion plans pause. Forecast confidence drops. And the conversation needs to move to leadership level to determine whether the relationship is even still viable. This matters because it's easy to spend enormous amounts of time and energy trying to stabilize a relationship that has already lost its foundation. If the customer no longer cares about the problem that you solve, no amount of structural reinforcement will produce a different outcome. You need to know that before you invest time and effort in the framework. So the gating question is simple. Can the customer, in their own words, explain why this initiative matters to their business right now? If yes, you proceed. If no, you stop and have a different conversation. Now, the PRP evaluates 4 dimensions. Each one represents a distinct failure mode. And before I walk through them, I want to be clear about something. These 4 dimensions are not scored and averaged. You don't add them up and divide by 4 and get a health grade. That approach hides weakness behind strength. An account that's 10 in 3 dimensions and a 2 in the 4th is not a 7. It's a 4. The weakest dimension determines the priority. Period. The first dimension is relationship density. This measures how broadly the relationship exists across stakeholders. Does the account depend on a single individual? Are there multiple points of contact across different roles and levels of the organization? Would the account survive the departure of its primary champion? Concentration on a single individual is one of the most common and most dangerous forms of account fragility. I've lost track of how many accounts I've seen that looked perfectly healthy right up until the one person who understood the program and cared about it moved to a different company. Without relationship density, you don't have a customer relationship. You have a personal relationship with someone who happens to work at your customer. Those are very different things. The second dimension is narrative strength. This is the one that most teams underestimate. Narrative strength measures whether the customer can explain value independently in terms of their own priorities and their own words without any prompting from you. Here's why this matters. If the vendor is carrying the story, the relationship is unstable. Think about what happens at renewal time when there's budget pressure. If the person making the budget decision can't independently articulate what they're getting and why it matters, they're going to struggle to defend that spend. Your champion may believe in the value, but if they can't make the case in the language of their own organization's priorities, the account is at risk even when the relationship feels strong. Strong narrative strength means more than one stakeholder can tell the story. It means the value is tied to a current business priority, not a past initiative or an assumption that hasn't been tested recently. And it means that the customer owns the narrative. They're not depending on you to explain it at every meeting. The third dimension is early risk signals. This dimension identifies emerging instability before it becomes a formal issue. The PRP distinguishes between two types of signals here. The first is structural signals, things like losing an executive sponsor, active budget pressure, or ownership confusion. These require immediate action. Now, these are not things you monitor and revisit next quarter. They demand a response right now. Second is behavioral signals, things like slower response times, shorter meetings, or slightly less engagement. They require validation before escalation. They might indicate a problem, or they might reflect something entirely unrelated to your relationship, but they need to be tested, not ignored. The discipline here is in the distinction. Most CS teams treat all signals as the same, either ignoring behavioral signals because nothing obvious is wrong, or escalating everything right to crisis mode. The PRP gives you a structured way to categorize what you're seeing and respond proportionally. The fourth dimension is services stability. This measures whether delivery reinforces or erodes trust. Inconsistent delivery weakens even the strongest relationships. If your customer is dealing with recurring issues like missed deadlines, support failures, implementation delays, the relational goodwill that you've built doesn't protect you forever. Trust is a depletable resource. Services stability tracks whether your operational delivery is adding to that reserve or drawing it down. Now let me talk about timing, because the PRP is not a continuous process. It's a targeted one. The PRP activates when an account shows early signs of instability but has not yet reached a formal at-risk state. That window between the first subtle signs and the point where the account is officially in trouble is where the PRP lives. And it's the most valuable window that you have because you still have time, you still have options. Once the account enters late stage risk, the PRP is the wrong tool. That requires a full recovery motion. I covered that back in episodes 7 and 8 when we talked about the path to green and get well plan framework. The PRP isn't a replacement for that work. It's what you do before that work becomes necessary. The PRP also has a time horizon built into it. If you have more than 6 months before renewal, you can run the full process. Between 3 and 6 months, the model compresses. You focus narrowly on the highest risk dimension and the actions most likely to change the outcome. Inside of 90 days, the PRP it's not the right tool. At that point, you're in recovery. And it runs on a 30-day cycle. Diagnose, act, validate. We'll go deeper on execution model in the next episode. let me pull this together with a composite example, because I think hearing the framework in action is more useful than hearing it just described in the abstract. Picture an enterprise account: strong adoption, consistent engagement, no open escalations. Now, if you looked at this account in your CS platform, nothing would flag. The health score would be green. But when you apply the PRP, something different shows up. The entire relationship is carried by one person, a mid-level program manager who's been the internal champion for 3 years. There's no executive level engagement. Nobody else in the organization can articulate the value of the program. And that program manager has recently mentioned casually that her team is being reorganized. Relationship density, unstable. Narrative strength, unstable. Early risk signals, behavioral signals present, trending toward structural. Services stability, well, those are fine. The PRP tells you this account is fragile, even though every traditional metric says otherwise. Now, the weakest dimension, relationship density, drives all of your action. You start stakeholder expansion work immediately. You bring in your sales counterpart to support executive access. You work with the champion to help you connect to her successor or her manager before the reorg finalizes. You don't wait for the risk to become visible. You act on the structural weakness before it becomes an emergency. That's the PRP. That's the difference between measuring activity and measuring survivability. In the next episode, we're going to get into the operational mechanics, how the 30-day cycle actually works, what diagnose, act, and validate look like in practice, how the ownership model changes when a PRP is active, and what decision impact the PRP has on your forecasting and expansion planning. Because understanding the framework is one thing. Running it under real-world conditions with a full portfolio, competing priorities, and cross-functional teams that aren't always aligned it's something else entirely. That's what we're covering next. Now, if you want to get ahead of it, the PRP framework and the companion worksheet are available at clearpathcx.com. The worksheet walks you through every dimension: the gating condition, the time horizon assessment, and the execution plan. It's designed to be usable on a single account in one sitting. So follow the show on your favorite platform so you don't miss any episodes. Connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Mark Bernardin. And if there's an account in your portfolio right now that feels fine but doesn't quite sit right, go run the gating condition. Ask yourself whether the customer can still articulate why this initiative matters to their business. I think you might be surprised what you find. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for showing up and delivering every single day. I'll talk to you soon.